Well, good afternoon F11 members, and welcome to the latest of my post-production fundamentals video tutorials. Today in issue 17 we're going to be looking again and deeper at some of the tools we can use in Photoshop. As I stressed last month, Photoshop is a software that is capable of doing far more things than most of us will ever need to do. And us photographers, really, what we need are just a few tools to really bring out the best in our pictures. And I'm aiming to put all the pieces together over the next few months, which will enable you to really bring out the best in your images from working through the raw processing stage and then here fine-tuning things in Photoshop. So let's just look at this picture here, and I've opened it up. I've processed the raw in Lightroom, and now I've opened it up. And the first thing I need to address is the fact that, again, I was shot this handheld in really high winds in Bryce National Park, and I didn't get the horizon quite level. So I've rotated the picture in Lightroom to straighten it, and I'm left with these grey bits in the corners. And of course I could, should I wish, just crop those out, but actually using CS6's content aware fill, I can actually be much more refined about that and not have to throw away pixels, not make the picture any smaller than I want it to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is up here I've selected the magic wand tool. Okay, it's not a tool I use a lot, but where I've got a very specific grey area selected here, all I have to do is just click on that, and then I just click on the grey area there. It's selected that. I want to ask it to do all of them at the same time, so I'm going to click on that as well, and that as well. And then I go edit, fill, and it comes up with this content aware, and I just click on OK, wait for it to do its thing. We did this last month with when you remember when we were doing that panoramic image, so I just think it's worthwhile showing you again to reinforce how it's done. It's done that now. The selection, this area here, that's what's called a selection. I'm now finished with that selection, so I just go deselect. Okay, and now that image is straightened. But the thing I want to do now is actually, I'm looking at that picture and I think there's a strong image there, but some of it's a bit lacking in guts, particularly at the top of the image. And I showed you in a couple of months back about how to make selections and then adjust levels and curves for definite areas of the image, and that's what we're going to do now. But before I go any further, one thing I'd like to stress is that it's really not a bad idea at all to think about using layers to make sure that your editing is non-destructional. What do I mean by that? Well, if I were to start working on this picture as is, and I went so far and I thought, I'm not sure about that, I want to go back to where I started. If I'd ran out of history here, I couldn't. I'd have to close the image down and go back. So what non-destructional editing enables you to do is by making, there are numerous ways of doing this, but let's just go like this, new and duplicate layer, and it's going to make a background copy. And that now is just a copy of the image which is sat on top of it. And here it is up in the layers panel here. And what I'm going to do is all of the work I'm going to do on this layer now, so that if I want to go back to where I started, I've got the original background layer sat underneath that's not been touched. So that's one way to think about doing your editing. It's good practice to get into, really, because every time you make adjustments you're essentially throwing away information. There are numerous ways of doing this, but this is one way anyways. And now I'm just going to, as I showed you before, I'm going to make a selection because I don't want to darken the whole image because these areas here are about right. But this area at the top I want to work on a little bit. So I'm just going to make a selection, again using the lasso tool. You saw how I did this before. And just, that's fairly rough. And I'm just going to feather that selection, modify, feather. Now it's asking me my radius that I want to work across. I'm going to say something quite gradual, such as 250 pixels, okay? And now what I'm going to do is actually just adjust the curves on that top part of the image. Okay, so let's just say I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Curves, and there it's showing me the curves not for the whole image but just for the area that I've selected. And you can see I can afford to bring in the black point here, and if I click Preview on and off, you can see what effects that's having. It's just giving that area of the picture, it's enhancing its contrast. It means these shadows here are not a sort of washed out grey, but a much richer, darker tone, although there's still information there. We don't want to throw away any information, so if I go this far, you can see, obviously that's way too far. And if I now just click on this Show Clipping, you can see all those black areas are where I am throwing away shadow detail. We never want to throw away detail, essentially. I'd think as a rule of thumb, I would stress you always try to hold on to every pixel of highlight or shadow, tonal or color information. Good practice. Okay, so I'll click clipping off. If I were to move the white point in on that part of the image, just make sure I'm not clipping any black skin. If I were to move the white in, immediately I'd start losing highlight information. So there's no scope for moving the white point. What I can do now, of course, is I can choose to look at the image here and then just the selection, the area of the selection that I want to do, and look at that and say, just do I want to darken it just a touch? In fact, I don't really. I think just bringing that black point in has made this area of the image quite bold, so I'm quite happy with that. And going too far, obviously things start to look a bit unreal. So I'm going to go OK there, and now I'm going to go Select, Deselect, and I'm going to look at the top of this picture now, and I'm going to make another selection here, which roughly in line with that edge of the hill there. Again, I'm going to feather that, so I go Modify, Feather. Again, 250 pixels is about right. Go Image, Adjustments, Curves again, and at this point I can again look at my black and my white points. My histogram tells me really I've not got much scope for bringing the black in. A touch, brought it in 7, and let's have a look at highlights. If I move them in, and there you can see up here I'm just starting to clip some highlights there. Pull that back to about there. Unclip. Now just have a look there, and you can see that those distant hills which looked a bit flat and washed out. It's put a bit of contrast in there. That's quite enhanced it quite subtly. I'm quite pleased with that. Now I'd then go OK, and then I go Select, Deselect. Now if I come back here to my layers palette, this here is basically on top of the original one. And if I click this eye here, on and off, you can see that's hiding the top layer, revealing the bottom layer. And you can see the effect that my edits have had so far on the image. And obviously I can click off the background layer. That doesn't make any difference because it's behind the top one. I can of course change the opacity of any layer as I choose, and if there's a slider here for example, I can bring back the opacity on the top layer. Sometimes that's quite a useful thing to be able to do. I can delete layers, I can combine them, I can have as many layers as I like, but just be aware with every layer that you build up, it's actually a copy of the bottom. So now I was working with a 120 megabyte image as is. Now with 2 layers that will be double. So it's starting to represent a lot of information there. Okay, the next thing I would look at is, I just think this middle area of the image there, I've enhanced the contrast of this area here, but now this bit here looks a little bit washed out. And what I'm going to do is again make a selection. Now there are numerous ways of making a selection. We used the magic wand tool before to select that grey area around the corners where I'd straighten the picture. But now I have to admit, you've probably picked it up already, I'm a great fan of the lasso tool. You can use the magic wand or the quick selection tool as well, and they all have their places. But for this business of just tweaking contrast and density of selective areas of the image, I find the lasso tool just very, very useful in tandem with this feather concept. There again, I'm going to bring back that feather radius because it's a smaller area I've selected here. I'm going to bring it back to 150, okay? Image adjustment. With all of these adjustments, what's key is to end up with something that looks real and believable and not overworked. Okay, so I'm now just going to again adjust the white point, and if I go too far you'll start to see these little speckles appearing here telling me I'm clipping highlights. So I come back and I'm going to do the same with my blacks there. I can't go very far at all. Nevertheless, these small adjustments do have a significant effect. If I click on and off there, you can see enhance the contrast in that middle area. It's had the effect, quite frankly, of making the blue of that area just a bit over the top. So what I'm going to do now is just go image adjustments and then just desaturate the blues in that part of the picture. So I just go here, master, and select blues, and then take out some of the saturation just because my tweaks have just made the colors look a bit too lurid in that part of the picture. If I preview that on and off, you can see that's much more subtle. So I'm happy with that. And then I would go select, deselect, and look at the picture. And always with all of these things, it's best to say, actually, you know, the less you do the better. Would I want to do anything else to this picture now? I'm pretty happy with that. So at this point, if I said that I don't want to make any adjustments, I can now come to layer, flatten image, and it's just going to squash it. So in effect, it's all you're going to end up with is that top layer, and there you go. And that's it. I'm finished with that picture. So this business of layers is very useful. and we're going to be working with layers in many different ways. Last month you saw how we used layers to make panorama, to blend a panorama together, and here we have layer adjustments, which basically these enable us to make tweaks to the overall image using adjustment layers. And I've just clicked on this one here, which is the vibrance and saturation layer, and essentially what it's done, it's put in a layer there as an adjustment layer. This is a different use of layers, and we're going to be taking this further in part 2. So we'll welcome you back there shortly. Thank you very much.